In this lecture, we're going to use the XML HTTP request JavaScript object to download some HTTP data. We can either do that asynchronously or synchronously. We're going to go to Qt Creator and play with that. Here we are in Qt Creator. We are going to create our project. It's a Qt Quick application as usual. We call it XML HTTP request demo. Store it in a location on our drive. Hit next. Choose your Qt version. Choose your kit and finish. We want to change this title here. We want to import Qt Quick controls because we are going to use a text area. Let's do that. And down here, we want to put in a text area component. ID is going to be text area. It is going to fill the parent. We want to give it the ability to show rich text. Let's say rich text here. This is going to allow us to display HTML data. The purpose of this is to show the HTML that we download from the internet. Okay, it's going to act like our minified browser. That is really useless. It's going to show crappy data. It's not beautiful, but it serves the purpose of showing what you can do with XML HTTP request. We want to put in some placeholder text. Let's say HTML data here. This will do. Down below, we want to put a mouse area that is going to fill the window. And when it's clicked, it's when we are going to download our data. Okay, so you can download your data synchronously. And this means that this is blocking. The moment you hit the mouse area here, you're going to wait until the download is done so that your application can keep doing something. This is not recommended. The recommended way is to go async and do this asynchronously. But I want to show you how to do synchronously because sometimes you want to do this for small sets of data. So we want to define a function that is going to help us do that. We define it in the root level of this component here. And we're going to call it download data. And we want to give it a URL that is going to download. We're going to create a var variable, call it XML HTTP request. And we are going to define it like this. This is how you define your stuff in JavaScript. You can use the new keyword. After you have defined your XHR object, you want to kick off the download. You kick it off by calling the open method of it. So we're going to say XHR open. We want to specify the method. It's going to be get because we want to fetch data, and you pass in your URL. And after you do that, you do an XHR send. And just like this, you kick off your request to get HTML data. Now you want to know the status of your request. You want to know if you got the data. You want to know if there was some kind of error and things like that. You can capture that in the onReadyStateChange method of your XML HTTP request. And the way you do that, you define a function like this, XHR onReadyStateChange. You see that it is a function that you can define here. And we define our function that is going to do that for us. Once in this function, you want to know what ready state you are at. And you capture that using the property XHR ready state. Okay, so there are a bunch of ready states you can check, but in this lecture, we are only going to check for headers received and done. Header received is going to tell us when we received the headers from our request, and done is fired when the request is finished. And we can check to see if we received valid data or if we got some kind of error. So what we want to say is if XHR ready state equals XML HTTP request headers received, we're going to do something. Else, if XHR ready state equals XML HTTP request done. I want to copy this because I really am lazy at typing. We want to do something else. So when we receive the headers, we just want to say console log headers received. Okay, we want to do this. When the request is done, we want to know if what we received is valid HTTP data. You can check the status and you can say if XHR status equals 200, which is what you receive back when you get the data successfully. You get a status code of 200. You know that you got the data. But if you don't get this, you know that something is wrong, and we say that in the console. So we say console log, something went wrong. Okay, now we want to capture the data. Okay, if we get here, console log, got the data. Now, when you get your response, it is stored in the property of XHR that is called response text here. Okay, so we can actually QString console log this. Okay, I'm going to copy this and add that here so that you can see it in the console. Got the data, Elise, and you say what you got from the internet. Let's kill these spaces so that we have things a little more readable. And this is really how you get stuff from the internet using XML HTTP request. Now that we have this download data function of ours, we can call it when we click on our mouse area. So we can say download data and pass in a URL. You can pass in whatever you want, but I am going to pass in this URL because I like it. And we are going to use the service they provide to play with REST APIs in the next lecture. So I'm going to use this. Now I can try my application. It is going to show me this window here, and the window is going to be clickable. Inside, we're going to have a text area that says HTML data here. When we click the mouse area, we're going to kick off the download, and we should see the result of our download. We're going to either see got the data and show the data that we got, or say that something is wrong, and we're going to see it when we receive the headers. Let's run the application so that you see for yourself. We are not seeing the placeholder text, but let's try clicking on this. And you see that we are getting HTML data. If you don't believe me, we're going to try something. We're going to go to the same URL that we have specified in here. Where is it? It's here. I'm going to copy it, open it in my browser. It is opened here. And if I look at the source code of this page, I am going to see the same things we received in our application. Let's go to the end, and you see that the end is HTML body. We have a script that ends in 497. Let's come back to Qt Creator, and at the end, you see that we have the same thing. We have HTML, we have body, and we have 497 here. So we are successfully fetching data from our QML application. Okay, and if we go up, we should see our headers received message. It is here. We say that we got the data, and we say the data that we got from the internet. This is how you can download HTML pages from your QML code. But this is not good enough. We can actually take this data and put that into this text area here to make it visible. We also want to change this property here to text so that we see the text inside. Okay, now what we can do is go back in the function, and instead of showing this in the console, we could say text area ID text equals this thing we got from the internet. Let's copy this and say text area ID text equals whatever we got from the internet. You can put a semicolon here or you can leave it. It's all going to work. Let's run. Okay, HTML data here. We see our text. You click and you see that we got the data from the internet. Okay, they try and display the data in here. Okay, it is not as good as it was in the browser, but it shows you what is possible in your QML code. And people can actually read this if you happen to wrap your text area here in a clickable component. People would be able to scroll through this to see the entire page. But this is not the recommended way to display HTML data in your application. I'm doing this just as an example so that you see what is possible. So now we have fetched data synchronously. We want to do the same thing, but asynchronously so that you don't block the user interface. What we're going to do is block this method that we created, and we are going to create it again, but make it asynchronous. So we want to copy this and put that to the top here and flag what we want to do. And the way you do asynchronous request with XML HTTP request, it's really easy. But if you are not familiar with this, the callback syntax is probably going to put you off, but don't be afraid. Just focus on what we are trying to do. And when you see the application running, you're probably going to understand. So we're going to say function, download data. We are going to pass in the URL, but we also want to pass in a callback function. This function we are going to call when we get the data, and we are going to specify a function when we call this. I know this sounds convoluted, but bear with me. You're going to see how we use this. We are mostly going to do the same things as we did for downloading data synchronously, so we can actually copy all this thing inside. I think the method ends here. Yes. So we can copy all these things inside the method, put that back in our new method, but we are going to do things differently when we get the data. We're not going to display that in the text area. We can actually copy this because that's what we want really. We take out all of these things and we have to call the callback method with the data that we got from the internet. Okay, so we are making this data available to the user that called this method here. We also want to call the callback method and call it with null when we don't get anything with our request. So we say callback and we pass in null just to show that we have an error. But we also want to keep our log messages. So here we're going to say console log resource found, and here we are going to say console log resource not found if we don't get the data that we want. Now, how do you call this method? We're going to comment this out because we are going asynchronous, and we basically say download data. Okay, you pass in the URL as usual. I'm going to copy this and put it inside. But I also want to pass in a callback function. So I can actually directly pass in a function like this, give it a parameter list, and put in the body of the function like this. And inside here, I can do everything I want with the data that I get from this function here. And this function here is our callback function. We are defining it here so that we can do some things when we get the data. And notice that this function gives us a parameter, so we need to capture it. We can pass in a parameter to capture that and call it response. And we can work on this response. It isn't nothing fancy that we're going to do with the response. We're just going to check if it isn't null. And the way you do that, you say if response only. So if it is not null, we're going to fall here. If it is null, we're going to fall down here. Okay, let's say null. So if it isn't null, we want to do the same thing we did in here. Text area ID, set the response to be our text. So we're going to say text area ID, text, set that to be response. Okay, and we can do the same thing here. Text area ID, text equals some error. Let's say some error here. This will do. And just like this, we are calling our methods asynchronously. Okay, we pass in the URL and the callback method that is going to be called back when we get the data from the internet. And when we do this, we can go on and do our stuff. When the download is done, this method is going to be called and we are going to update the interface. When you call your function like this, you are not blocking the user interface, and it is the recommended way to get data from the internet if you can. Let's run to see that this actually works. We have HTML data here. If we click, you see that we get the data just like we did synchronously. But this time it is better. It is not blocking the user interface. And ladies and gentlemen, this is how you get data from the internet using XML HTTP request and consume the data in your QML application. You can do that synchronously, as we saw here, or you can do that asynchronously and not block the user interface. In the next lecture, we're going to see how you consume REST APIs in your QML applications. I'll see you there.